Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich. The past few weeks we have been covering Julian Assange's extradition hearings. For journalists covering this case, it has become apparent that this entire process is very difficult for the WikiLeaks founder. However, very few people can actually fully understand what Assange is going through. Joining me now is computer scientist and activist Lauri Love. Lauri is one of the few people who can fully understand what Assange is experiencing, as Lauri has gone through this process himself and has successfully fought extradition from the UK to the US. Lauri, I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to begin by asking you, where are we at in this moment in time regarding Julian Assange's case?
So it's quite a long process, which is not great if you're being detained in horrific conditions during that process, but this is kind of near the start, if you can believe that. So you have the initial hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court. There'll be a ruling by the district judge, and whichever way it goes, it will probably be appealed, and then it will be settled at the High Court, Court of Appeals, and potentially then go on to the Supreme Court. So if it was a journey, I'd say we're maybe sort of getting to 1/3 of the way through, or possibly 1/2 of the way through.
If you have been following these hearings the past few weeks, can you just tell me your general impression of what took place in the court?
I mean, shambolic is too generous. Kafkaesque is almost doesn't fully capture just how deeply cynical and torturous it has been in many respects. So just to outline, a major problem has been the inaccessibility to observers, to the press, and to international monitors who are there from various non-governmental institutions and representatives from the European Parliament, representatives from organisations concerned with press freedoms, who have obviously taken great interest in this case because it's of such monumental importance to a free press and therefore to democracy, who have been systematically denied access because of the small size of the courtroom, because of the issues with social distancing due to the coronavirus. However, through technology, it should have been possible for as many people as want to observe and participate through observation in this hearing to do so, and they've been denied. So there have been up to 40 organisations who have wanted to monitor this case, and there's been immense frustration at their inability to get in. That's just one of the issues. There's been problems with the technology to have witnesses, and there have been so many expert witnesses. There's so much important information that is relevant and germane to this hearing to do with the background and history of WikiLeaks, what the publisher has actually revealed to the world in terms of very serious misdeeds, war crimes, and the relevance that's had to the world, and also important testimony regarding the horrific conditions in detention in the United States in the process. And there's been difficulty of those witnesses being able to give that evidence in full because of technology and because of the prosecutors and the judge trying to limit what can be entered into the public record. And those are just a few. I could give many more examples.
So I also want to touch on WikiLeaks publications, their significance, as well as WikiLeaks core values. Can you speak to that and why it's so important that we have organizations that are publishing crucial and vital information that needs to be made public?
So the important thing is to remember the framing and the context. So WikiLeaks came into the forefront, into the public stage, during the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, which were, let's be honest with ourselves, voluntary wars of aggression by the United States, not necessary for the defence of the United States, as part of the supposed war on terror, which has led to the destabilisation of the Middle East, millions of deaths, and an ongoing situation that's going to be very difficult to resolve. And the problem was that these wars were only possible because the systematic co-option of the mainstream media to the imperialist war machine that made it palatable to the public to go to war in Iraq. And we saw this in the UK, we saw it with the sexed up dossier, all of the papers saying Saddam Hussein could launch missiles in 45 minutes that could hit the UK, all lies. It turned out in retrospect that the weapons of mass destruction. WikiLeaks' core principle was to use a technical term, disintermediate the facts from the people, And in colloquial terms, that means cutting out the middleman, cutting out the editorialisation and the filtering and the media slant and the bias that allowed these mainstream media organisations to create the conditions for these horrific wars. And the way to do that was to give the public access to vetted, verified, original source documentation, so materials of truth, and to not selectively publish them, to not put an editorial slant on them, to not present them with a spin, but to allow the public to see the truth and come to their own conclusions. And this was through, and that's in the name, WikiLeaks, is to create a system whereby brave people, whistleblowers who have access to these materials that have immense relevance to the public could safely get them to the organisation WikiLeaks, who could then publish them and make them available. And this has had a huge impact, and the main thing people will remember is the collateral murder video, and this is footage from a war helicopter in Afghanistan, and you could see members of the US Department of Defense military opening fire with Hellfire missiles on what turned out to be journalists and civilians, and 2 Reuters journalists were killed. And no one would have known had it not been for a brave whistleblower accessing those files and using WikiLeaks to publish them. At the same time, there was the war logs, as they were called, which is information collected about the campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq that revealed the true extent of civilian casualties that were being covered up by the press, that people didn't understand. And suddenly the world, the public, got a real image of how these wars were being perpetrated and prosecuted, and that changed the tide and helped the anti-war movement. Similarly, WikiLeaks revealed information about the atrocities in Guantanamo Bay, where the United States was extra-legally holding what they called enemy combatants and systematically torturing them out with the rule of law outside of the Geneva Conventions. And it was only through publication by WikiLeaks of information about that some of these atrocities were able to be stopped by lawyers and human rights activists. And so I'd say it's impossible to overstate the impact that WikiLeaks as a model of transparency in journalism has had on the world. And what we're seeing through this vendetta, I would call it, by that same machine that whose war crimes and whose injustices were revealed against WikiLeaks and against Julian Assange as the sort of person representing this courageous truth-telling initiative, is so ferocious because people who want to control the world, who want to have wars of aggression, have wars for resources, to destabilise sovereign governments, want to do that with impunity and do not want the public to be involved, because that takes away their ability to do so.
Do you think that this is the United States retaliating against Julian Assange for publishing very embarrassing information?
100%. And all you have to do is use your imagination and change it from the United States to any other regime. So say if it was a regime somewhere in Africa or somewhere in the Middle East, and they had committed atrocities and war crimes, and a journalist, a publisher, had revealed that to the world, and a legal judicial process was set up to render that publisher to the regime that had committed those atrocities so that they could be punished, and so that a chilling effect, so that a deterrence could be made to stop such things happening in the future, the whole world would be up in arms against it. But yet somehow the United States and the UK have this strange myopia, this strange ability to pretend that this is somehow not terrible. We wouldn't countenance it if it was any other place, but somehow the UK judicial system is seriously considering sending the person who spoke the truth about terrible things to be punished by the people who did those terrible things.
Can you speak about the UK justice system and its fairness or lack of fairness?
Yes, I can. It's a mixed bag. The fact that I'm here today alive and somewhat free and able to speak to you is because the system did work in my case, that we successfully fought against and won and prevented an extradition request from the United States. And I want people to know just how rare this is, that the treaty that was signed in the wake of the Iraq War by the government of George W. Bush and the government of Tony Blair, the partners in the destruction of the Middle East, was incredibly one-sided. It's the only extradition treaty that does not require from the requesting country a minimum standard of evidence, what's called a prima facie case, enough to convince a regular person that there is a case to be answered. That requirement was taken away. No other country has that privilege. It was all done to make it incredibly easy for the United States to extradite people from the UK, supposedly to fight the war on terror. And they're almost always successful. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's in the 90s. So you pick a random person and try to extradite them 9 out of 10 times, they're going to go there. And this is done on the assumption that there will be a fair trial on the other side, and that's why we don't have to contest the evidence. But as someone who's sat through this process, and picture yourself, one day the police come knocking on your door, they take you to London, you go to Westminster Magistrates Court, you're told that you're going to be extradited, you sit and you hope that you'll make bail. In my case, that required a bond of £5,000 and the surrender of my passports, and I was able to go home only on the condition that I go to the police station initially every day to answer bail, and that made it just about possible to campaign and organise and to work with my defence. Julian hasn't been afforded that privilege. He is in Belmarsh prison. His access to lawyers, his ability to see evidence is severely curtailed. His mental and physical health is deteriorating. So that, again, speaks to the difficulty of this process. Yeah, so the assumption is that you'll get to the United States and you'll get a fair trial, but you don't really, you cannot really imagine that's going to happen, because in the United States federal criminal justice system, around 97% of people do not actually get their day in court because they take what's called a plea bargain. And the plea bargaining system is called coercive, which means that they are effectively strong-armed, bullied into doing so, because the charges levied can be so ridiculous. In my case, it was 99 years, so effectively the rest of my life. Julian's case, it's over 100 years, 140 years. And they say, we will lay all of these charges on you. You will have a stacked deck. You will be in the Eastern District of Virginia, where the people on the jury will be part of the military-industrial complex simply because of the economical labour system around that place. And you can take this risk of spending the rest of your life in horrific conditions where you might die because of the deterioration of your physical and mental health, or you forsake your right to a fair trial and you take the plea bargain, and 97 people out of 100 do that. So there is no meaningful hope that there will be a fair trial, and yet claims can be made in the extradition hearing that cannot be contested on the basis of evidence. So the whole thing is Kafkaesque. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the hope is that it gets to a higher court where the process is a bit fairer, and we can talk more about that.
Okay, Lauri Love, thank you. Now, in the second segment to this 3-part series and exclusive interview with Lauri Love, we will discuss the history of his case, his fight for freedom, as well as WikiLeaks and others' role in helping make that happen. I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich, and thank you all for watching.